you want to get laser focused on what do we want to do with this website. Once we're laser focused on that, we can devise a tracking plan that's going to capture everything you need to know.
Welcome to the Mastering E-commerce Marketing Podcast. I'm your host, Eitan Koter, co-CEO of Vimy. In an era of rising acquisition costs and increased competition, this podcast is dedicated to helping you drive sales, engage customers, and build meaningful communities so you can turn passive visitors into active buyers. Now let's get started with the episode. Hello, listeners. Today we're joined by Joshua Lauer, a marketing intelligence expert who specializes in helping businesses turn marketing chaos into clarity. As the founder of Lauer Creations, Joshua has worked with over 100 companies, including multi-million-dollar brands, to fix their GA4 headaches, streamline marketing data, and drive measurable growth. In just 2 years, he generated over $100K in revenues by providing data-driven insights that empower businesses to make smarter marketing decisions. Get ready for an insightful conversation on how to stop flying blind with your data and start making every marketing dollar count. Hey, Joshua, welcome. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Doing well. Really excited about this topic today, right? There's so much chaos around data, right? There's overflow of data and so many questions are rising on this topic. I'd love to chat with you. But before we dive in, Joshua, if you can share with us like 3 words that matter most to you and why.
Yeah, I think the 3 words I would choose are truth, accuracy, and growth. And I think they all kind of go together. Truth is something that I think is undeniable. It's based on facts. Hopefully not things that people call alternative facts. And accuracy is about always kind of fine tuning and becoming more specific, because the more accurate you try to become, the more you realize how difficult it really is to be very specific as a human. We just tend to say things differently. And then along with that, growth is something I think is very important, as, we're all growing every day, but more specifically, I think people can get into like the day-to-day habits and sort of have that experience that you blink and how many years have gone by. And so by having a growth mindset where you're always trying to learn more and add more, I think it exercises the brain and actually can sort of elongate the experience of living.
Yeah. So great. So I think it's really interesting, the way because truth is just a big, just a big question mark behind this word, during the last few years, right? And I think the question mark is just getting bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting side of things. And so what got you to marketing intelligence and why you decided to focus on that specific area?
Yeah. So when I got into the field of digital marketing, internet marketing, it was probably around 2009. I was reading a Rolling Stone magazine and I came across an article for Full Sail University, and they had an internet marketing program. Well, coincidentally, at the time, I was doing, singer-songwriter stuff in a band, and I felt like that was the missing skill set. If I could market the music better, I would be able to get more discovery. And so I decided to go to school for internet marketing. I also thought at the time I could probably, pull in a little bit more, income than like an entry level sort of hourly wage job. And so I thought it'd be a nice way to kind of make a better living while still trying to kind of promote the music. Fast forward to finishing the program, and I got an internship. And then I got hit with like imposter syndrome, thinking I didn't know enough. And so with and then you get home and sort of you're challenging yourself all night, it sort of became kind of hard to like get home and work on music. So the music is still something that I do. And it's still very much something I want to accomplish some results with. But in the meantime, the marketing stuff kind of took over. So in that first role, I was at a software development shop, and they had, WordPress sites that were kind of going out the door pretty regularly. And there was a small digital marketing team. We had some retainer clients where we would do like paid search campaigns, SEO, and social media, stuff like that. And I became the guy in-house that was like the default, like sort of when those websites are coming through, we're going to get your analytics all cleaned up and make sure that when you get that new website, you also get a very fresh, well thought out analytics setup that'll help you assess its performance for years to come.
Interesting. Um, Obviously, today is such an important topic, right? Obviously, there's like overwhelming amount of data, right? Which actually makes everyone confused, right? So you work with more than 100 companies already. What are some of the, maybe let's start with the mistakes that you see people are doing with data, and what some of the, good things or good behaviors or processes that companies are doing, with their use of data?
Yeah, a common thing with data, especially, I feel like this was more prevalent about 10 years ago, but like, is that, and if you remember like the big data hype, that was a real thing back then, that instead of AI, it was big data. But around those times, there was just this attitude of if we could just collect all of it, why not? Then we have it. And what you end up having there is just like a big mess, right? Like the data's not structured any way.
Mhm.
You'd have to comb through it. If it's stored on your server or stored out there in the world, it's still kind of the same thing, right? So like that was problematic because now when you go to look at your data, you're like, it's like when you haven't cleaned your house in like a month or something because you've been busy and you're like, oh, I have to do all this stuff just to like, kind of, you know, have access to the kitchen because some dishes have been, on the counter and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it kind of prevents you from just going in and finding the insights. So, and then kind of on the other hand, what are the insights? What do you want to do with your website? So like being really, really intentional about these are the goals, like we have specific, whether it's an e-commerce site and you want to make sure the transactions are tracking accurately. Maybe you also want to grow your newsletter on an e-com site. If it's a B2B kind of space, you're going to have, usually like a sales form or something like that, that people are filling out and then getting that into your sales team and make sure they're following up accordingly. And on that front too, there's a lot of stuff that can go wrong in a sales pipeline from website into CRM. And so making sure on the sales side, there needs to be alignment along with the tracking. But really you want to get laser focused on what do we want to do with this website. Once we're laser focused on that, we can devise a tracking plan that's going to capture everything you need to know.
Mhm. So assuming the scenario of an e-commerce website, what's the exact process for first just, getting all the data, right? And how do you automate reporting thereafter?
Uh-huh. Yeah. So depending on the site technology that you're using, there's going to be a variety of different ways that we collect that data, but usually we're going to use Google Tag Manager that gets installed on the site that allows us to sort of deploy any necessary tags. And Google Tag Manager uses something called a data layer. Uh, data layer. I don't know if that's
Mhm.
clear enough.
Yeah.
And in the data layer, um, you can kind of push information in on different page loads. So if somebody views a product, the data layer will get a little message about like just the name of the product, so on and so forth, right? So we are going to capture product list pages, right? So places where you could look at a bunch of items. And then when you click on a specific one, there's going to be a view item. There's going to be add to cart events. And then eventually there's various, depending on the site, different steps for checkout. So we'll track all those steps so we can see kind of what does the funnel look like in the checkout. And then obviously the purchase conversion, which is going to track the total number of items, basically everything that was in the cart, as well as like the total, that the transaction amount came to, any shipping and taxes
Mhm.
would all get collected with that.
Yeah. So you aggregate all this data to various tools probably are involved. There is any centralized database, so each one of those tools has its own database. And how do you just, aggregate everything together and probably enrich the data? And what's the next step? I mean, in terms of dashboards and
Yeah.
automate reporting, how do you implement those processes usually?
Yeah. So with GA4, there's pretty much a one-click integration with Google Cloud Platform. So you can send the data to BigQuery. And so once you get it flowing in GA4 and you're like, all right, we're good. This is, because in the very beginning, there's a real scenario where you could turn stuff on. You might be doing it in a dev account and it might look funky, right? So there's a little bit of like, all right, this is almost ready to go. And we iron out some of the kinks. And then we're like, okay, it's ready. Now we turn on the thing to go to BigQuery. So we're storing like actual data, not just test data. Once it's in BigQuery, we can query the data however we want, do all sorts of things with it. And then that also enables us to use Looker Data Studio, which is kind of what I think is one of the better data visualization tools out there. I've used Tableau, Domo, some other things, and Zeppelin. I've used some Jupyter notebooks, but I feel like as far as like something you're going to hand off to someone where they can look at the dash and kind of interact with it a little bit, Looker Data Studio, my goodness, is a great solution.
Yeah. And what are some of the, reporting dashboards? Usually you get those default dashboards and sometimes they show, wrong matrices. What do you usually recommend to track and how dashboards should look like?
Yeah, so there's a handful of reports. There's going to be a report about your users and the first channel that ever drove them, so we can kind of understand what channels are driving discovery. That report would include conversion level metrics as well. So we're going to have like a volume of new users by the channel that drove them, and there's a way to make a drill down. So you could say, for example, if the channel was, paid social, we can click on that and drill down and see like the campaign names. And then we can see like how many purchases is it driving, or if we want to flip it over to like how many newsletter signups, we can do that in the dashboard. So that's users. There's another one that's very similar, which we'd call like an acquisition report. And so the user report is the first channel that ever drove you to the website. The acquisition report is going to be the channel that most recently drove you. And so within that, again, we can see the conversions that are coming from those channels. In GA4, there's a data-driven algorithm that kind of decides how to allocate the credit for where the conversions go. In BigQuery, you can write your own queries and kind of make your own logic. So I'm kind of a fan of the last non-direct session that was kind of a thing with Universal Analytics. And so I've sort of replicated something similar with my queries. The reason there was mainly that accounts that had been reporting on data for a number of years, once they switched to GA4, they needed, kind of to be able to compare to that historical performance. So we wanted to have something that was kind of as close to parity with that as possible. Today, I think the data-driven algorithm does a pretty good job. It doesn't look night and day different from what you used to see. So if you're just starting out, like that would be fine to use that. So we've got different things talking about where you came from, how you discover the website. When you come to the website, there's a variety of different pages, right? So like the next kind of important report is a landing page report. And in the world of analytics, landing page really just means the first page that someone viewed when they came to your site for a given session. I think sometimes in the marketing world, landing page is more of like the big experience that we're going to drop people on. So there can be a little bit of confusion with just that term there, but really we just mean the front door when we're talking about a landing page report. Those are kind of some of the basic ones. As we start to get more detailed, there's more tracking we can do on, like, obviously the homepage is the most common page that people see on any given website. So usually there's a hero image and some other kind of treatments on the page. So having, click tracking on all those things allows us to make a dash page that sort of imitates the layout of the homepage. But instead of seeing all the things on the homepage, you just see the numbers kind of. And so that gives you a nice ability to track, what's going on with the homepage. So those are the basics. Once you get a little bit more advanced, or you start kind of, maybe you've been rolling out reviews and kind of other functionality on your website. There's, when you view a product, we can look at the star rating that you see. We can grab that and say, this product was viewed, 500 times last week, and the average rating that a person saw when they looked at it was, 4.7 or whatever. And then how many reviews did it have? Are people leaving reviews? Maybe we have other products that we're promoting if we're promoting those other products, are people clicking on those? And if they do, are they checking out? So, it can get pretty deep, pretty fast.
Yeah. And you mentioned some really like revenue driven examples, right? Just tracking paid media, tracking conversion website, tracking, loyalty programs, whatever, conversion on the main page, and a variety of those scenarios, which is obviously, very, very important. So you have taking this raw data, implemented in the right way. You mentioned GA4 algorithms or BigQuery. You can develop those queries on your own. And then you have some really good insights about what's really happening. And so how the process continues from there. I mean, how do you improve? How do you provide recommendations? How this ongoing loop of improvement is usually implemented?
Yeah. So depending on the group and the organization and sort of what the leadership wants to do, I mean, that's a big factor, right? So like you're going to look at this data and say, here's what we saw last month. It looks like various things here are responsible for growth or decline, depending on what happened. And, share that information back to the leadership. They're going to ultimately decide, do we want to do kind of more of what we did last year? They're probably also going to have, so these dashboards are all like what we'd call like demand level, right? So like you're going to have like a CFO type person who's looking at the financials, and those numbers tend to be sort of a lot different than the demand numbers, just because at the moment that we get the order in GA, like it's when the person placed the order. We don't go as far as tracking returns usually in Google Analytics. I've dabbled with that in the past, but I feel like it just sort of confuses the data a little bit and kind of makes the reports a little harder to interpret. So it's easier to just have like more of a pure demand kind of approach to that, and then kind of get that other stuff right, on the financial reporting.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where, that being said, because there's returns in one place and not in another place, you could be looking at a report that says things are up, but for whatever reason, there's a bad month, and there may be more returns or whatever. And so the financial is going to look at it differently. Or maybe there's like a bunch of product that like they haven't moved, that's just been sitting in the warehouse. So that's a liability for them, and they need to move it. And so they're kind of working out how to deal with that or how to move product. And so some of the high level stuff can kind of seem like it's at odds sometimes with some of that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's important to understand that they're kind of pointing at two different things. And, if we're talking about the website and that demand generation piece, obviously you can get split testing involved. You can also, roll out new features and find ways to track them without a split test, and then kind of make segments of people that interact with it and compare them to segments that don't. Or, if you have a new thing on a product page and halfway down the page, they can interact with it. You could compare sessions where people scroll about halfway down the page and see how far they get along in the checkout process compared to people that scroll to where they see this item. And so there's kind of different ways you can, once you've got a solid solution in place, that's when you can start saying like, oh, last month we saw this, and I kind of wonder if this is a thing, And so another thing worth tracking is like the navigation on your site. And, typically we're all used to seeing a desktop version of a site on a computer and a mobile version on a phone. And the mobile version today most often comes with a hamburger menu that you have to open and expand in various different ways. And so looking at the navigation and seeing what people are clicking on gives you real insights to kind of streamline that navigation. If you have to open a hamburger menu and then click on a category, and then once that category opens, there's a subcategory that you can click on, and then finally you can click on the page you want to go to. If we go back and look at last month and see, like 2 out of 3 people are clicking 4 clicks down to get to a specific category, we could just make a quick link so that like when you open the nav, it's like one of the first things you see, right? And then furthermore, what if like last month was seasonally appropriate for a certain category, but coming up here in 2 months, a totally different category is going to be relevant. So you can start to anticipate that. And so 2 months from now, we're going to change that quick link to this other thing that's going to be more important, right? So kind of using that data to kind of as a feedback loop say, hey, we're seeing this. Could this be true? Let's try it.
Yeah. Joshua, I want to talk to you more specifically and really listen and have your thought around GA4. How do you see GA4 today? Maybe it was a tough first year, I guess, in the introduction, and so a lot of like failed implementation. So how do you describe, GA4 since it started, and how do you analyze it today?
Yeah, for sure. I agree. It was very rough when it first went live. Some of those key reports that I'm talking about that we make with dashboards, part of the reason I'm doing them with dashboards is because it was hard to find them in GA4. Today, they've built out most of those. They finally have where you can plot the rows now. So you can click on like a row and plot it and see how that, and I mean, for a number of years that was missing from Google Analytics. And that was a great feature to be able to just click on the row that you're interested in, click plot row, and then see that sort of trend line above.
Mm-hmm.
Also, they've added along with that, there's an ability now to change that trend line from day to week or month, depending on what your time range is, which can be really helpful. If you're looking at a whole year's worth of data and you've got a trend line that's by day, you're staring at 365 data points, which is a lot more than if you group by month, and you're looking at 12. So it can really smooth out the sort of the trend line, so to speak, and make it easier to interpret. Granted, that being said, sometimes you do want to see that day level data to kind of understand how the trend throughout the week, is shaping things. Like in the retail world, for example, a lot of people like to shop Friday, Saturday, Sunday. On the flip side, if we're talking about more of a B2B space, we're going to see that the activity is really Monday through Friday. And so being able to see those kinds of like little shapes in the trends is quite nice. Another thing that really felt like it was very much missing from GA4 was something called advanced segments. So on any report that you could go to on the top of the screen in the old version, you could load up an advanced segment. So one of those the preset ones that they would give you would be like, say you're looking at the acquisition channel report and then you click, I want to see mobile traffic only. And so it would show you all traffic versus mobile. And then you can add like another segment on. That's still not there. But in the explore section of GA4, they do let you make advanced segments now where you can say, give me sessions that included this event.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a really powerful feature that I'm happy that it's back. It's a little bit buried. A lot of the stuff just feels more buried than it used to be. They're rolling out many of the features and, annotations are back. That's in the last few months. So, that's where like you'd see a dip here or there and then you'd go in there and write like, this is what happened, and you couldn't even do that for a while. So it's really nice to be able to see that because, a lot of times when the stuff is happening, what's going on. But then next year, when you're comparing to the previous year and you're like, we have like this 300% increase and everyone gets all excited. But then when you look at the previous year, you're like, oh, there was like 7 days where the data is missing. What happened here? And maybe a dev push caused something to break and it took a while to fix that. If you've got annotations on, it's really easy to see like, oh, that's what happened. You don't have to like sort of dig in and play detective. And so it's a great way to like keep a solid memory of what has happened because, that kind of stuff all really matters when you're digging into the data. And when you have a sensational moment like that, where you go, hey, this looks like a really big increase. This is really, important. We need to, continue doing what we're doing. And then the question is, okay, well, what were we doing? And so making sure what happened is really important there. What else is, I think other new things that are in GA4, they have more like sort of machine learning all trickled throughout, right? So there's like anomaly detection in various reports where it'll tell you on a certain day we saw a spike or decrease, which is really nice because that could be an alert that something either was broken or something could have been double firing on the other hand, or it really was like this promotion just kicked off and it was like amazing. So yeah, I would say GA4, it's come a long way. The event-based approach and like the kind of user-based approach makes sense when you come from like an app background, and it really feels like what GA4 is the app tool that sort of took over Google Analytics. I think part of the reason for that is because Google Analytics, being like one of the most used analytics platforms in the world, was very tailored to websites. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Personally, I think there's a lot of websites out there that can benefit from it. But I think there's, data people at Google that are like, we want this to be useful beyond just websites. And I think that's the kind of compromise that then has made it like sort of watered down feeling for websites. And they're sort of bringing back some of the features that made it better for websites. So it's been coming along, but yeah, there's still plenty of room for growth. The thing that's great about it, when you have the BigQuery integration and you know how to do the SQL and bring stuff into Looker Studio, is you can get all the data and the reporting that you had in the old version.
What do you see as a hidden reason maybe that most GA4 implementation fail?
Well, so where you had UA, the previous version was page views based sessions, all this stuff. They thought about it for you. They thought about what you wanted to see and what you might most likely need to analyze. In GA4 now, there's so much configurability that the new people coming in that are going to learn this tool are going to learn it on whatever site has it installed. And that is likely going to be a completely different setup than the next site that they work on. So it's much more of a sort of unique snowflake, so to speak, as far as like every single GA setup can be wildly different. And I think kind of addressing the failure aspect of that is that when you come into a new GA4 property and you're trying to manage it or track it or improve it, it's a lot harder to diagnose what needs to be fixed or what's wrong, because there's a lot more sort of variability in what can actually be tracked.
Yes, interesting. Great, Joshua. So tell us more about Lauer Creations. What type of service you provide, which type of companies you're looking to work with.
Yeah, so Lauer Creations is my sort of company for, doing this consulting work. I had started it in, I think, 2022, after working for a number of years internally at that agency where I worked on a lot of different websites. And then I've gone to some more specific places where I was kind of the in-house guy and sort of got to go deeper with the data. And, you meet sort of all sorts of friends as you work at different companies, and they go to the next company later on eventually. And like, I wish I had someone like you at this company. And so it kind of started, it was officially started in 2022, but there was like a crossfade where like for a number of years, I'd have a friend or someone being like, can I hire you to do a consulting thing on the side here? And so eventually I just kind of was looking at the numbers and I was like, if I get a handful of accounts that, would be willing to pay for a retainer to keep me, floating, I could probably switch to doing consulting full time. And so, and I really, another kind of sort of catalyst to that is probably the GA4 announcement, right? Where they were like, oh, you need to migrate. And I was like, oh, I see an opportunity to kind of approach people and companies and say, hey, do you need help upgrading to GA4? And so, decided to go for it. And it's been really, I would say like, I build marketing intelligence solutions, right? Like it's the tracking, it's the reporting, it's the analysis, and that's the strategy that kind of goes into all of that, right? As part of the tracking, we're having discussions about what the strategy is and why you'd want to track this for that campaign or whatever. There's always kind of a unique requirement where it sounds like everything's tracking the same, but for this one, we want to track it like that, so there's those nuances. And yeah, really, I feel like having a good, solid marketing intelligence solution allows you to kind of sleep easy at night, knowing that you've had the best data at your fingertips when you're making the decisions about where to spend money.
Yeah. And what kind of brands or teams, will get the most value from working with you?
So I would say there's a certain level you kind of need to be at, in order for it to make sense, right? If you're still kind of in the early stages and you're trying to figure stuff out, like it's a little bit harder because we could set up some advanced tracking and put a bunch of time and resources into it. But if you don't have that many people coming to your site, it's not going to be super useful. So I've dabbled with saying like you probably want to be doing at least like, 10 million, 20 million in revenue in a year to kind of have it be worth it to work with me. That doesn't mean that it's not worth it to look into Google Analytics. And certainly you could be more at like 1 million a year and starting to kind of figure out how to turn that corner.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but generally speaking, you want to have a pretty well-established business, but maybe in that established business, you find yourself having focused on logistics, expanding your team, trying to make sure you have the right people in various roles. And then all of a sudden, now you're going, okay, we've got this team, we're doing this stuff, we're accomplishing goals. And then you're like, hold on, what's driving this? How are we tracking this? This person is doing this thing. This other person is doing this other thing. Are they touching base? And so you start to kind of realize there's a need to sort of make sure the efforts are all in sync and make sure that everyone's looking at the same data. And when you find yourself on a team like that, where there's a little bit of uncertainty around, did this person's efforts drive this, or was it this person's, or was it a combination of the both? That's a good time to look for someone like myself.
Nice. And so how people can find you?
I would say the best place right now is on LinkedIn. So you can look for Joshua Lauer and you'll see like a happy looking guy from a photo about 15 years ago. Yeah, I think I was at a wedding, and send me a message with the words deep dive audit, and I'll get back to you with a link, and we can hop on a call to talk about your business and how I can help you. And,
Right.
yeah, I think that's the best way to do it. I shy away from, sharing fantastic numbers and stuff, because the real truth is that, business is about working with people, and these numbers that we're talking about represent various actions that people have taken. And as long as we understand that, like, we're going to find some insights that are worth finding, that are going to be meaningful for your business. I don't think that there's any kind of a truth to someone saying this business did this move and it changed everything, and it'll change it for you too. Like there may be specific moves. They might be similar. They might be very different. I've seen a lot of things where even the same industry, the philosophy of the leadership can vary enough that they're going to do it this way. These other people are going to do it that way. And so we want to line up the tracking and the data that allows them to see sort of the things that are important to them.
Like even two similar companies competing with one another, like on the same product with the same market, right? They're probably using different marketing channels for growth, and the market sentiment is completely different for them, and brands like founder story is different. And yeah, each one has its own story and differentiation. Great. Joshua, anything else you want to add?
I guess I'm drawing a blank at the moment.
All right. I think we're in a good place. We appreciate your time. Thank you so much for your great value and insight. It was super interesting.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Wish you all the best. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the end of this episode. If you found this episode valuable, please subscribe so you won't miss any of our future content. Explore Vimy, the video commerce platform that includes live shopping, shoppable video, and social commerce capabilities. Visit Vimy at www.vimy.net. We appreciate your support and look forward for bringing you more valuable insight in our next episode.